a group of survivors arrived at what was called the New America, surrounded by high walls. Though its exterior seemed unremarkable, the interior was a paradise. In stark contrast to the outside world swarming with zombies, people were busy with their own affairs, and street vendors were everywhere, indicating that a social system had already been established. Just then, Doc spotted a terrifying woman wearing half a mask, but before Doc could ponder further, George called out for them to hurry to a medical examination. When Doc looked back, the terrifying woman had disappeared. Without further thought, Doc led them to the quarantine station.
Welcome to Altura, the longest-running zombie-free outpost in all North America. Give yourselves a hand. You made it.
They then underwent medical examinations one by one. After the examination, Doc became a citizen of New America. Next, Lily also passed the medical examination smoothly. However, when it was 10K's turn, there was a problem. His pulse was very weak, as if he was on the verge of death. The doctor then examined 10K further and found a healed bite mark on the back of his neck. Lily saw this and spoke up and said that she had bitten him, which helped 10K out. At this moment, Lily and Doc were waiting to be assigned jobs. Suddenly, Doc saw Red inside the fence and called out loudly to her, but Red, being too far away, couldn't hear him. Just then, a man handed a child to Red. Doc was incredulous, unable to believe that Red had married and had a child here. He was unsure how to break this news to 10K. Speaking of which, didn't Lily tackle 10K to the ground in the season 4 finale? Their relationship seems a bit complicated. Meanwhile, Cooper was moving lumber outside when he noticed someone approaching from behind. It was Murphy, who had traveled day and night to get here. To show he meant no harm, Murphy dropped his backpack on the ground. Still, Cooper cautiously searched Murphy from behind and disarmed him of his only handgun. Then, Cooper asked what Murphy was doing here. Murphy replied that he came looking for his teammates, but Cooper said he had been living alone. Inside the house, Roberta was listening to music and reading a book, completely unaware of the situation outside.
She's a super great gal and a personal friend of mine, and I'd be forever grateful if maybe, you know what, if you haven't seen her, you haven't seen her. So,
Seeing Cooper's apparent ignorance of Roberta's whereabouts, Murphy decided to pick up his bag and leave. Suddenly, Cooper called out Murphy's name, delighting him. It seemed Roberta must have told him. Murphy then asked if Roberta was indeed here. Cooper lowered his guard and confirmed that Roberta was in the house ahead, saying he would take Murphy to her. But instead, Cooper led Murphy to a warehouse. As Murphy was happily discussing Roberta with Cooper, Cooper suddenly knocked him unconscious. When Cooper didn't return, Roberta, worried, went outside to look for him and eventually found him in the warehouse.
Everything all right? I was worried about you. The fire's almost out.
Yeah, it's on my way back inside.
Thinking Cooper was mourning his deceased wife and daughter, Roberta, being lovesick, began to console him and offered a comforting kiss. But just then, sounds came from the car's trunk. Roberta, seeing this, slowly walked to the front of the trunk. Then, with a heart full of trepidation, she opened it.
Yeah, I know.
She then questioned Cooper about why he had tied up her friend in the car. Cooper said he was going to take you with him. We've had a good life and I can't let anyone else ruin it. Roberta was deeply saddened to see the man she loved act in such a manner. She had placed her trust in him, only to be repaid with such betrayal. Still, Cooper believed he had done nothing wrong, asserting everything he did was for Roberta. Roberta, infuriated, slapped Cooper hard. Seeing Roberta so agitated, Cooper quickly moved behind her and restrained her tightly, continually saying, "I did this because I love you too much." Cooper tried to persuade Roberta to calm down and talk things over. Roberta felt utterly disillusioned, realizing the man she had been close to day and night was willing to kill her loyal friend just to keep her. Once Cooper released her, Roberta didn't hesitate to knock him unconscious with a frying pan. Then, Roberta freed Murphy.
Finally! Hey, next time, get me out of the trunk before the fight.
It's good to see you too.
Faced with such extreme love, Roberta chose her lifelong comrades over it. After being rescued, Murphy was furious and asked Roberta if they could kill him, but remembering Cooper had once saved her, Roberta decided to leave Cooper to his fate. Roberta then stepped outside, tears flowing as she looked at this place that had once been filled with beautiful memories. It all seemed like a dream. And now the dream was over. With that, Roberta and Murphy set off for New America in their tractor. This was the first day of work for Doc and his group in New America. George came over to congratulate them. Doc was assigned to the education department as a teacher, while Lily and 10K were assigned to the self-defense force to guard the gate. George could tell they were somewhat dissatisfied, so she said that after the public vote, everyone would be able to choose the job they wanted. At that moment, a soldier was violently mistreating talkers. George stepped in to stop it, stating that talkers were once just like us and should not be treated this way. George then asked Dante for a biscuit and she told the soldier to let talkers go. Talkers saw the biscuit and jumped on it. George signaled the talkers to calm down, promising that there would be biscuits to eat. With George's continuous reassurance, the talkers slowly regained human consciousness and calmed down. Everyone was amazed at the miraculous effect of the biscuits. Dante then remarked that without biscuits, all of New America would be thrown into chaos, as all talkers would go berserk, making it impossible to build New America. George's wish was for humans and talkers to live together in New America. Doc asked, "What if New America's constitution is not passed tomorrow?" Dante replied that it would lead to a large-scale war. Soon, New America welcomed the last batch of survivors. Among the group of survivors, 10K and the others spotted Roberta and Murphy and excitedly greeted them. It was unexpected that Roberta had survived so tenaciously. The X squad was once again assembled, indicating that trouble was looming for New America. At that moment, the examiner came out and broke the atmosphere, stating that they hadn't completed their medical examination yet, so they should avoid too much physical contact. Then, the supervisor signaled Doc to start reading the welcome speech.
Welcome to Altura, the longest-running zombie-free outpost in all of North America. You made it! Give yourselves a hand!
Amusingly, no one paid attention to Doc, leaving him feeling a bit embarrassed. The supervisor then directed humans to the right and those whose life or death status was unclear to the left for isolation. Murphy followed Roberta to the right, but a guard stopped him, referring to Murphy as Satan. This infuriated the hot-tempered Murphy, who immediately started arguing with the guard. At that time, George was discussing the construction of watchtowers with another founder, Roman. When Dante came in to report trouble at the gate, George decided to go and resolve the issue personally. After they left, Pandora stayed behind, seemingly brewing some conspiracy.
Is there anything else I can do for you in the meantime?
Back to Roberta. Murphy is still confronting the guards and Roberta explains to them that Murphy has a phobia, especially of scientists. Just then, George arrived late, and Roberta was shocked to see her. George was one of the survivors saved by Roberta 8 years ago, right after the disaster struck. Of course, George also recognized Roberta, and they embraced each other excitedly. Doc was surprised to learn of their connection. Seizing the moment, Murphy asked if they could go through the back door, but George still flatly refused. Murphy was then taken to the lab for a body check, where Sun May was the one to examine him. Murphy inquired about what Sun May had been through. Hesitating for a moment, she said she was rescued by the Marine Corps and then brought to New America. She was now researching how to turn talkers back into humans. Among other scientists, Murphy trusted Sun May the most, having spent so much time together. On the other side, George took Roberta to the newly established Congress Hall of New America, where the Constitution would be voted on tomorrow. George then introduced Roberta to another founder, Roman. Roman was one of the first survivors to live here, managing to restore water and electricity through his efforts. They shook hands politely, but suddenly, Roberta noticed a Zona mark on Roman's hand. Roman did not hide it, admitting he was indeed from there but disagreed with Zona's objectives, so he escaped early on. Roberta remained silent, as no one from Zona was trustworthy. Meanwhile, Citizen Z was conducting a global broadcast, having also arrived in New America to document its establishment. When Doc and his group appeared on camera, Citizen Z was incredulous, and they began to embrace excitedly. Seeing Lily, whom he did not recognize, Citizen Z also excitedly hugged her. Then, Citizen Z asked them to take a seat for a while. He would come to catch up with them after he finished shooting the end of the video. Citizen Z briefly said goodbye to Doc and his group.
That was so cool! Operation Bite Mark in the house!
On the other side, Pandora found Dante and tried to seduce him with her beauty, but Dante remained unmoved. His loyalty was only to George. Pandora and George had different views. She believed that humans were the only rightful rulers, and talkers should not enjoy any human rights.
Just because you can't get everything you want. Pity.
After the two men finished their drinks, a fierce argument broke out, and one of the men pulled out a gun and fired on the spot. The atmosphere immediately became very tense, but just then, the man who was shot surprisingly stood up again, leaving everyone stunned. It turned out that these individuals were talkers, zombies with human consciousness, who also lived in New America alongside humans. Though there has always been tension between the two groups, to prevent the man from further losing control, George removed the bullets from his gun. She stated that although we are different, talkers also possess human consciousness and experience emotions. They shouldn't be treated differently. After George's patient persuasion, the man realized his mistake. Subsequently, peace was restored to the bar. At that moment, Doc and Lily awkwardly stared at 10K, wondering how to break the news about Red to him. They just looked at each other, sharing an uncomfortable silence. After a long consideration, Doc finally spoke up.
Red's alive. She's here with another dude and they got a kid.
Upon hearing the news, 10K was dumbfounded. He couldn't accept that his Red had had a child with someone else and attempted to drown his sorrows in a large glass of vodka. They all felt very sorry for him. Soon, the election and voting in New America began, with Citizen Z capturing this significant moment on camera. If the vote passed, talkers and humans would be able to live together in New America. Otherwise, it would lead to a great war. As the countdown ended, the voting phase of New America's Constitution successfully concluded, and now it was just a matter of counting the votes. Meanwhile, while on guard duty, 10K spotted the longed-for Red and uncontrollably started walking towards her, but an awkward moment occurred the next second. Then, 10K sat alone on the lawn when Red chased after him. Seeing 10K, Red threw herself into his arms and started kissing him madly, but 10K resisted, saying that it would be bad if your husband and children saw it. Red was confused for a moment before hastily explaining that the man and child were her best friends, and she was just looking after them. Upon hearing this, 10K was overjoyed, and they embraced each other excitedly again. On the other side, the results of the vote at the Congress Hall had come out. Roman stated that it should be our beloved George who announces the results. Upon hearing this, they all expressed their agreement and began to loudly shout George's name. At this moment, George was nervously pacing backstage. Just as she adjusted her state and was about to go on stage, an explosion occurred.
Wish me luck.
After the explosion, the Congress Hall was in ruins. Some people were pierced through, and others were killed on the spot. Becoming talkers, Roberta found George among the debris, and soon Doc also came over. Thankfully, they were all relatively unharmed. They then began to help the injured on the scene, but just then, a large wave of zombies rushed into the hall. Seeing this, the group had no choice but to fight the zombies. With everyone's coordinated efforts, the zombies were finally annihilated. Just when they were catching their breath, the humans turned talkers began to rampage at the sight of blood.
I need more biscuits.
Soon, George managed to calm the talkers down with a large amount of biscuits, and the talkers slowly regained their humanity. At this moment, Roman arrived late and told George that the explosion might have been planned by a talker. George found it incredible since the vote was clearly in favor of the talkers. They had no reason to do such a thing. Meanwhile, Murphy, hearing the explosion from the lab, felt very uneasy. Ignoring son May's persuasion, he decisively left the lab. Upon exiting, Murphy encountered a guard who tried to take him away upon seeing the red monster before him. Murphy pretended to cooperate before knocking the guard unconscious when he let his guard down, and then made his escape once more. On the other hand, Roman finds a big hole in the perimeter that was vandalized, so it's obvious that someone planned the attack. Roman then inquired about Dante's whereabouts since he hadn't been seen since the explosion, raising suspicion towards Dante. However, George refused to believe Dante would do such a thing. They were brothers who had fought side by side. To clear Dante's name, they went to the lab to ask Dante's wife about his whereabouts, but she said she hadn't seen Dante today, but she could guarantee that Dante would never betray George. Just then, two members of the self-defense force arrived at the lab, stating they were ordered to take the talkers away for isolation. Seeing this, Son May tried to forcefully stop them, but Roberta saw the self-defense force preparing to shoot. so she stepped forward to persuade son May that they would talk later. Thus, Dante's wife was forcibly taken away. Meanwhile, Citizen Z discovered something in the camera. While reviewing the footage, Roman came over. Citizen Z said the camera might have captured the murderer planting the bomb. Hearing this, Roman's expression became unnatural, and then he forcibly took Citizen Z's camera under the pretext of investigating clues, leaving Doc and Citizen Z puzzled. Quickly, Roman began to announce the investigation results, indicating that Dante was a prime suspect in the bombing case. He declared the entire watchtower would be sealed off and all talkers would be isolated, claiming it was for everyone's safety. George was incredulous at this approach, which would only increase the conflict between humans and talkers. She wanted to confront Roman on stage but was stopped by Roberta. Roberta then took George outside, stating that arguing was futile at the moment and the priority was to find Dante for clarification. Just then, a van sped past, driven by Dante. With Murphy hanging on the back, the van charged through the gate, ignoring the guards' gunfire warnings, and decisively broke out of the gate.